Have you ever felt like you're losing a war before your feet even touch the floor? You hit that snooze button thinking you're gaining rest, but you're actually practicing the habit of defeat. That heavy sinking feeling isn't just exhaustion, it's the literal weight of stones you've been carrying that don't even belong to you. You've tried the midnight grind, caffeinating your way through a frantic pace, but your dream still feels like it's slipping away. You aren't lazy, you're just emotionally cluttered. But what if I told you that the real reason you can't wake up at 5 a.m. has nothing to do with your alarm clock and everything to do with a hidden burden you didn't even realize you picked up? Today, we follow Thomas, a bankrupt architect who was drowning in noise until he discovered the sacred silence. He found a hidden math that grants an extra 45 days of life per year. However, before Thomas could master the clock, he had to learn how to drop the invisible weights that were pinning him to his bed. A secret method we will uncover shortly. Your transformation begins by understanding the single, traitorous rhythm that starts with a flickering blue light and a truth about your fatigue that no productivity app will ever tell you. Thomas squinted at the blue light of his phone, blinking away the thick fog of a restless sleep. It was 8:45 a.m., and that familiar, nagging vibration on the nightstand felt like a physical blow. He slapped the snooze button for the third time, burying his head back into the pillow's warmth. But let's be real, Thomas wasn't just hiding from the morning. He was retreating from a life that had become too heavy to carry. Every time he retreated into the covers, he was signing a silent contract, telling his subconscious that his own word didn't carry weight. It's a traitor's rhythm, a slow dance with failure that starts before his feet even hit the floor. Most people think this is a lack of discipline, but Thomas was about to learn that he was actually paralyzed by phantom burdens. Responsibilities and expectations he took on from others that were never his to bear. Outside, the world was moving, harvesting the gold, while Thomas hid from his reflection. He lay there staring at a flickering light bulb, feeling a heavy knot of guilt tighten in his chest. The unpaid invoices on his desk were more than just debt. They were the physical manifestation of the energy he wasted trying to solve everyone's problems but his own. He knew he was reacting to a life that should be under his command. But a question remained. What was the specific, emotional anchor keeping him pinned to that bed? The answer involves a strange, piercing thought that would soon change everything. Imagine a world where the noise of the city hasn't yet started its daily, frantic screaming matches. At 5 a.m., the air is crisp, still, and carries a weight that feels almost like ancient velvet. This is the Sacred Foundry, a secret workshop where destiny is forged while the weak are snoring. But for Thomas, this hour represented something deeper, the only time he could truly reach himself before the world tried to sell him its own agenda. However, there's a secret about this hour that Thomas didn't realize. You cannot enter this sacred foundry if your hands are still full of things that aren't yours to carry. Real power isn't found in boardrooms, but in this pre-dawn holy verdict. It is a hidden competitive advantage that the top 1% guard with their lives. While others react to pings, the wise are proactive, building their fortress in the cool shadows. Thomas looked at his phone and saw more than just the time. He saw a mirror of a man building a life on sand while others were digging into stone. He was beginning to see that his sand foundation was actually made of other people's expectations. He was ready to master this silver hour, but first, he had to discover the emotional gravity that was pulling him back into the shadows of his past. A revelation that was about to break him. Thomas sat in a room that felt more like a cage than an office, surrounded by stacks of paper and the hum of a flickering laptop. At 30, he felt like he'd been running a race in waist-deep mud for a decade. Every late-night grind session until 2 a.m. only left him with bloodshot eyes and a thinning bank account. We've all been there, haven't we? Believing the lie that staying up late is a badge of honor. But Thomas was busy doing everything for everyone else, drowning in busy work, while his own true potential sat gathering dust. On paper, he was a CEO. In reality, he was a slave to his creditors and his own scarcity mindset. He was the bankrupt architect, drawing grand blueprints for a future he didn't have the foundation to build. What he didn't realize was that his foundation was crumbling because he was trying to build it using the heavy, jagged stones of other people's problems. He woke up every morning already behind, reacting to a world that didn't care about his survival. His energy was a dwindling candle, and he was trying to light the whole city with a flickering wick. But just as the weight of his failures became a suffocating blanket, A single digital chime was about to reveal the true cost of the weights he refused to drop, and the news was far worse than a simple empty account. The silence of the apartment was shattered by a sharp, digital chime from his phone. Thomas felt his stomach drop as he read the words, "Primary business account, frozen." It wasn't just a technical glitch. It was the cold, hard reality of a bank account at zero. For months, he'd bragged about his midnight grind and caffeine-fueled marathons. But let's call a spade a spade. All that sweat hadn't bought him a single lick of security. He'd been running on a treadmill, mistaking frantic movement for forward progress. The truth he was forced to face was brutal. He was drowning not because he didn't work hard, but because he was trying to swim while clutching onto the heavy stones of everyone else's expectations. He looked at the family photo on his desk. How could he look them in the eye when his strategy was just a series of lucky guesses? His greatest enemy wasn't the market. It was his own chaotic, broken rhythm. The walls were closing in, and the weight of his stubborn pride felt like a physical pressure on his chest. Something had to break, either his spirit or the destructive patterns keeping him small. But as Thomas hit rock bottom, he was about to discover that the frozen account was actually a blessing in disguise. It was the only way the universe could force him to drop the weights he was never meant to carry, and wait until you see who was waiting for him in the shadows of the next morning. Someone who held the key to a freedom Thomas didn't even know existed. Thomas pushed open the heavy wooden door of the corner cafe at exactly 6 a.m. sharp. The air inside smelled of roasted beans and something rarer, an atmosphere of absolute stillness. There sat Silas, not hunched over a laptop, but sitting tall with a single notebook open. He looked like a man who had already conquered a mountain while the rest of the world slept. His eyes were clear and sharp, showing no trace of the morning's early fog. In contrast, Thomas felt like a chaotic mess, his energy scattered and his soul heavy with the invisible debris of 1,000 yeses he should have never said. "You're late for the war, Thomas," Silas said, his voice a steady rumble of certainty. "The invasion began at dawn, and you've arrived just in time to see the victors resting." Silas explained that most people spend their days reacting to the noise of other people's needs, but the wise understand that the first hour is a vault where all great fortunes are kept. It's the only time when your ego is too tired to argue and your spirit is finally awake, provided you haven't filled that spirit with the stones of yesterday's regrets. You aren't failing because you lack capital. You're failing because you lack a quiet mind, Silas whispered. But then, Silas leaned in and said something that chilled Thomas to the bone. A quiet mind is impossible as long as you are still carrying the weight of a life that isn't yours. Thomas was about to learn the math of success, but Silas was hiding one crucial variable that makes the math work, a secret he would only reveal once Thomas proved he could let go. Silas grabbed a rough napkin and scribbled a number that made Thomas's eyes widen. 1,095 hours. "That's what you're tossing into the trash every year while you're dreaming," Silas muttered. "By reclaiming just 3 hours before the world starts its daily circus, you gain an extra 45 days of waking consciousness every single year. It's like being gifted a 13th month while your rivals are stuck with 12. Imagine what you could build with 45 days of pure, unadulterated focus, mastering new skills, automating your business, or finally finding peace." But Thomas quickly realized a terrifying truth. You can have all the time in the world, but if your mind is exhausted from carrying emotional debt, those extra hours are useless. Silas looked him in the eye and said, "The math of success only works if you stop spending your minutes paying interest on stones that aren't yours." Thomas felt a spark of hope, but he was missing the fortress, the specific structure needed to protect this newly found time from the predators of the afternoon. And the first rule of this fortress is something 99% of people get wrong, leading them straight back to failure. Silas leaned back and laid out the blueprint for what he called the fortress of focus. From 5 hours to 6 a.m., the rule is absolute. No scrolling, no news, and 0 digital input. It's a mindset sanctuary where you must use a simple journal to evacuate your deep anxieties. But here is the catch. You aren't just journaling about your day. You are performing an emotional surgery, identifying which stones you picked up yesterday that must be dropped before the sun rises. By bleeding these fears onto paper, you clear the mental RAM for the heavy lifting ahead. Then comes the strategic build from 6 to 8 a.m., tackling high-leverage skills like coding or financial modeling while your willpower battery is at 100%. Silas emphasized the 3 iron rules: a digital fast until 8:01 a.m., a body tax of movement, and the priority kill, no breakfast until the one big thing is finished. Thomas realized that this wasn't just a schedule, it was a cage for his distractions. Yet, Silas warned him, a fortress with strong walls is useless if the traitor is already inside. What or who was the traitor inside Thomas that made him crave the snooze button? The answer lies in a biological war that most people lose on the very first night. The first 7 days felt less like a new beginning and more like a brutal war of attrition. When that 5 a.m. alarm chirped, the air in the room felt like a bucket of ice water. Thomas's limbs were made of lead, and his brain screamed for just one more hour of sweet mercy. The seductive warmth of the blankets was a siren song, whispering that tomorrow would be better. By the 4th day, every fiber of his being was looking for a way to cut a desperate deal, promising to just work late tonight instead. But Thomas remembered Silas's warning. The snooze button isn't a friend. It's a tombstone for your potential. He forced himself upright, his bare feet hitting the cold hardwood like a shock to the soul. It's a bitter pill to swallow, choosing the discomfort of growth over the ease of decay. However, Thomas was discovering that the agony wasn't just physical. It was his ego fighting to keep hold of the stones and burdens that defined his old, failed self. Around day 10, something shifted. The storm broke, and the flow of the wise arrived, a clarity so sharp it felt like a superpower. He was finally awake, but this new alertness revealed a fatal flaw in his life that he had been too exhausted to notice, a hidden leak that was still draining his future even as he slept. With his new extra quarter of time, Thomas finally had the mental bandwidth to perform an autopsy on his failing business. In the sacred silence, he saw the leak that had been invisible during the frantic afternoon rushes. He was spending 80% of his effort on 20% of his clients. He realized he wasn't just wasting time. He was suffocating his growth by carrying the stones of low-margin relationships that drained his soul and his bank account. He pivoted immediately, focusing only on high-leverage connections. Fast forward 6 months, and the cluttered apartment was gone, replaced by an office of glass and polished steel. He wasn't chasing clients anymore. His quiet authority drew them in like moths to a flame. He produced in 2 hours what used to take him an entire week. The failed entrepreneur effectively died at 5 a.m. on that cold morning, and a wise leader was born, a man who finally respected the man in the mirror. His bank account was no longer a source of dread, but a scorecard of his new, disciplined rhythm. But as Thomas looked over the city, he realized that his success was still fragile, because there is one final, hidden debt that can pull even the strongest leader back into the noise. And it's the one thing you are likely carrying right now without even knowing its name. Thomas stood at his window as the clock struck 5 a.m. once more, watching the horizon glow. The world was still asleep, but he felt more alive in his 30s than ever before. He looked at the pen in his hand, a simple tool that had not only rewritten his bank statement, but had finally allowed him to draw a life of his own. You see, that snooze button isn't just a piece of plastic, it's a tombstone for your potential. Every time you hit it, you are burying the version of yourself that could have been a titan. But here's the truth most people miss. The reason you keep hitting that button is that your soul is too tired from carrying stones that were never yours to begin with. Tomorrow at dawn, the world will offer you a blank check for your future. Will you be there to hear the silence, or will you let your destiny drown in another hour of rest that actually leaves you more exhausted? We are looking for the few who are ready to claim their extra 1,000 hours this year. If you are ready to stop reacting and start building, this is your moment to sign the contract. However, signing the contract is only the first step. Knowing how to keep your back straight under the pressure of change is the real secret. Type Day 1 in the comments to signal your intent to the universe. But before you do, you must realize that even the strongest intent will fail if you don't have the blueprint to drop the invisible weights holding you back. A blueprint I am about to hand to you right now. Thomas didn't just find more time. He found a version of himself he finally respected. But let's be honest with each other. Most people who watch this will walk away, return to the warm, comfortable tomb of the snooze button, and let their destiny drown in another hour of rest. They will try to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow, but they will fail. Not because they are weak, but because they are trying to climb a mountain while carrying a backpack full of lead. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. Thomas only became the architect of his destiny when he stopped being the porter of other people's burdens. If you've ever felt that physical pressure on your chest, that heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt and unfinished paperwork, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created a specialized guide for this exact moment called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours. This isn't just another productivity book. It is the emotional blueprint Thomas used to clear his mental RAM and build his fortress. Main ebook, The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours. Your guide to letting go, setting boundaries, and finally living with the lightness required to conquer the dawn. Bonus 1. Learning to let go. The practical steps to identify which stones in your life are actually draining your bank account and your soul. Bonus 2. When saying no is an act of self-love, the ultimate shield for your 5 a.m. fortress, ensuring you never let the predators of the afternoon steal your peace again. The gates of the dawn are swinging open, but they only stay open for those with the heart to enter. You aren't just buying a book. You are signing a contract to stop reacting and start building. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Don't let your future sleep in. Drop the stones. Claim your silence. Become the master of your first hour, and you will master the next 60 years of your life. Your day one starts now.